Hello and welcome to our video summary of all you need to know about F. Scott Fitzgerald's book, The Great Gatsby, which is one of the largest classics, particularly in American literature. Now, when it comes to understanding this book, particularly if you're studying it for your courseworks or your exams, the first thing to be very, very clear on is context, and especially the most relevant aspects of context. This book was touching on the 1920s, which was highly influential, and this is a key contextual aspect of the book that runs throughout the entire novel. So the Jazz Age was really important, and the 1920s America was a flourishing time. The economy was very strong. The World War I had ended, even if America was not highly involved. Its economy had recovered very much from the war, and prohibition, which allowed alcohol, made those who sold it illegally very rich. So there were several parties which were set up called speakeasies as a result of prohibition, and this was a law that was passed and it lasted for a few years in early 1920s, prohibiting the sale of alcohol. So there were speakeasies whereby you could go and surreptitiously and illegally gain alcohol, and so the people that ran these speakeasies became quite wealthy. The 1920s was also a very important age of materialism and opulence, particularly before the Great Depression, which was going to hit much later on in 1929 to 1933. So that's really important to understand. When it comes to understanding the author himself, F. Scott Fitzgerald, he was a young man during the 1920s, and he was born in Minnesota. Then he was sent to New Jersey for school, and then thereafter he attended Princeton. So he's among the elites when you think about American society at the time. He was enlisted in World War I, so he did serve, and as I mentioned earlier, America, even if it wasn't directly highly impacted by World War I, it was dragged into the war, and F. Scott Fitzgerald and his experiences were very much shaped as a result of serving in the war. He fell in love with Zelda once he was back, who had only married him once he had made more money, and he fell into a very reckless lifestyle of indulgence, particularly once his novels started to give him fame and wealth. So this is very important to think about when you're considering F. Scott Fitzgerald's background and how it influences this novel. Now, the story itself. Nick Carraway moves to New York one summer, and we find him in this position at the start of the novel. He rents a home in West Egg in Long Island, and his neighbour is a man named J. Gatsby, who throws many parties and is very hard to ignore. West Egg is where the new money lives, whilst East Egg is where the old money, long-standing wealthy families live. And East Egg in many ways looks down on people in West Egg, because even if they are very rich and very well-to-do, they don't have the pedigree and the background that they do in terms of having generational family wealth. Nick goes to East Egg to visit his cousin called Daisy Buchanan and her husband Tom Buchanan, and he discovers that Tom has a mistress called Myrtle. Nick travels with Tom and his mistress to the city to visit the flat that Tom keeps there for his affair. Then Nick is invited to attend one of Gatsby's parties. Again, these parties are so fabulous and so large that they're very hard to ignore. And through a friend, when he does attend this party, Nick learns that Gatsby knew Daisy and was once in love with her. Gatsby, as we find out later on, often stares across the bay from his mansion in West Egg, across to where Daisy and Tom's mansion is in East Egg. And he stares across the bay at the green light at her house's dock. His lifestyle and the great parties that he throws are all a very elaborate attempt to impress Daisy. Gatsby asks Nick to reintroduce them once he realizes that Nick is Daisy's cousin, and Nick holds a tea at his home, which both Daisy and Gatsby attend. The love is rekindled and they start an affair. Tom Buchanan, Daisy's husband, begins to get suspicious. And one day in the city, Tom announces that Gatsby is a criminal who made his money from bootleg alcohol. Again, going back to context, Gatsby is new money, but perhaps didn't make his money in a most reputable way. So perhaps he could be one of the characters that benefited from the prohibition law and creating and setting up speakeasies. Daisy then sides with her husband once Tom shows him up and embarrasses him. And Daisy and Gatsby drive back home whilst Nick and Tom follow. But on the way, they find that Gatsby's car has hit and killed Myrtle, Myrtle being Tom's mistress. They all rush back, and Daisy tells Nick that, and Gatsby tells Nick that Daisy was driving when it happened, but he will take the blame. Tom tells Myrtle's husband that Gatsby killed her, and the husband, in a rage, goes to Gatsby's home and shoots him in the pool, then kills himself. Now, when it comes to understanding the key characters, the main character is Jay Gatsby. So he's a young man who rose from poverty. He's part of the new money in 1920s America. He became wealthy by selling illegal alcohol during the time of American Prohibition, when all alcohol was outlawed. And he met Daisy as a young military officer and fell in love before going into fight in World War I. And he is very good at reinventing himself. He even changes his name. Nick Carraway is the other key character to understand. So he's a young man who's just moved to New York from the Midwest. He's a quiet character, but the perfect observer to tell Gatsby's story. Meaning, in terms of narrative structure, he's a very reliable narrator. He's very trustworthy, and all the characters in the novel seem to like him. With respect to Daisy Buchanan, she's Nick's cousin and Gatsby's long love. And she is Gatsby's ideal. She's a wealthy and sophisticated woman. However, she's also very shallow and fickle. And in the end, in spite of all the sacrifices and the hard work that Gatsby has put in order to win back her love, she decides to side with Tom and to side with tradition. She chooses Tom over Gatsby, even when Gatsby is willing to take the blame of Myrtle's death for her, showing that she can be also very selfish. In terms of the key themes, the first is the American dream. So after World War I, those who fought in it and came back became disillusioned with the life and morals before the war. People began to live much more freely and they became much more indulgent. And young, poorer people began to make fortunes off the stock market or selling illegal alcohol, which caused the old ruling class to scorn them. And the idea that anyone could become wealthy is called the American dream. However, this is called quite into question through Gatsby's character. So Gatsby does achieve the American dream. The American dream being rising from poverty and humble beginnings and amassing great wealth. However, Gatsby still faces class barriers in spite of his rise, and what F. Scott Fitzgerald might be wishing to illustrate in this book is that the American dream, even if perhaps it can be attainable, one might always find themselves as an outcast. So both Gatsby and Nick represent the American dream. Nick, on his part, represents the American dream because he moves from the Midwest to New York, a place of opportunity to try and make something of himself. The second key theme is class. So the difference between the old ruling aristocracy, which is old money, and young rising wealth, new money, is very obvious. And old money lives in East Egg, whilst the new money lives in West Egg. And new money is portrayed in the book as gaudy, very showy, throwing very lush parties and living in large mansions. And the classes dislike each other, showing a divide in American society at the time. And obviously the fact that Daisy in the end chose Tom illustrates the fact that old money and new money can never quite reconcile. In terms of analysis, the first thing is the green light. And this is important as a symbol because it symbolizes Gatsby's hopes and dreams for the future, which is to be with Daisy. The eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckleburg are another important symbol. So they're painted on an advertisement billboard near where Myrtle lives. And many think that they symbolize the eyes of God looking down and judging the way this society lives with its opulence. Fitzgerald stresses that these eyes are a symbol and they only have meaning because characters want to see meaning in them. So that's it. If you found this video useful, do give us a thumbs up and do subscribe to our channel where we publish and create several revision videos to help you succeed when it comes to English, both at GCSE and A-level. Thank you for listening.